All right, so this is the 7th chapter of Gibbons. This chapter revolves around listening. Listening is often neglected in lesson planning. There's not really a section created for it. Lesson plannings are more kind of from the direction of the teacher to just the students in general. Unfortunately, listening is also taken for granted. And it's not just simply comprehension, but it has a route to one of the key routes to language development, possibly even more than speaking. The teaching of listening is often just kind of assumed to just happen, unfortunately. There's not really like skills kind of consciously taught in the classroom. But listening and speaking are often considered to be a single unit, and there's not kind of a break for the two of them. But like I said earlier, listening is a key to language development, and there should be a level of intention behind it. Listening parallels reading because they both involve comprehension rather than production. They both involve an active construction of meaning. In Chapter 6, we talked about how students may be able to sound out words, but if they don't know what they mean, sounding out the words is irrelevant. Also, they both depend on predictions of the content and the language and the genre that the listener brings to the text. So the listener can possibly, if they have enough background information, they could construct and use a script that would be understood. The idea being of a script being, oh, I have a background knowledge of this certain information, so as somebody else begins to talk about that information, the listener can already somewhat predict where the conversation is going to go. There are different types of listening. In the chapter, they are constructed in a matrix, which I like because that speaks to my mathematical skills. There is, on the left side, interpersonal versus informational, and on the bottom is one-way to the top being two-way. And interpersonal two-way communication is the easiest for English language learners because of the fact that they can go ahead with a two-way conversation, rely on context clues from the person that they're conversing with. They can also rely on facial expressions or different objects. And because the conversation is interpersonal, they can use colloquialisms or everyday language. Whereas informational and one-way language is the most difficult. One-way language is incredibly difficult for English language learners because of the fact that they do not have anything to kind of base their language off of. They don't have the context clues or objects. They have to be very explicit with their language. They can't be implicit or imply much. And as well as the informational, because that forces them to rely more on academic language than on colloquialisms. So one of the things that we as teachers should try to do, especially if we have many English language learners in our classroom, is introduce ways to listen. So one of the techniques that the chapter discusses that I really like is the idea of getting students to be silent and just listen. And then after a predetermined amount of time, possibly 2-3 minutes, bring the students back together and ask them to identify what they heard during that quiet period. Another thing that would be good is to practice two-way listening. And what that can be done, you can go ahead and model that with sentence starters, talking about how you can interact in ways that call for clarification, call for asking for more explicit language to be used. And then the chapter goes on to provide many different examples of ways that this can be incorporated into the classroom.